I love that. And you talked about LinkedIn. I was gonna save this for last, but I feel like this is a good segue to that. So LinkedIn, I got my first tech sales job from LinkedIn. I probably got most of my jobs from LinkedIn in life, or indeed more back in the day now. LinkedIn is expanding so much that I really don't. One thing I will tell y'all though is to submit your resume on Monster. I did have pipeline come in terms of jobs for Monster. But in terms of LinkedIn, I got my current job, my last job. I started my business on LinkedIn. I know a lot of your business pipeline comes from LinkedIn. I met you on LinkedIn. So talk a little bit about LinkedIn and your advice to grow on there as far as scaling and building your personal brand. And before you answer that, as far as my best advice, it would be four things. Number one, as far as growing your LinkedIn, number one, add 100 people every week. Now, who you're going to be adding is going to depend on your current situation. If you're trying to get a job, then you should be adding hiring managers, talent acquisition, VP of sales, business development managers, CEOs of companies. My second piece of advice will be to post valuable content. If you need help posting content, reach out to me at Larry Henderson on LinkedIn. And I got a lot of cheat sheets I can share with you as well as mentorship. Third one would be to network with people in person as well as on social media. You can do that to grow on LinkedIn. And then my last piece of advice is just to be bold and network. So, what would be your best advice for people that's trying to build their personal brand and grow on LinkedIn?
I agree with everything you said. Um, I think you want to be thoughtful and always tie any efforts you're doing on LinkedIn back to a business metric or a personal metric or an outcome. So, what I mean by that is becoming an influencer on LinkedIn can be addicting. And the reason why it can be addicting is because you're like, oh, people are strangers from all over the world are engaging with my posts and liking them, and I'm kind of growing my online presence, and this is kind of cool and things like that, right? It's the same way on Instagram. You have Instagram influencers, and some of them do it because they're narcissistic. You know, they like feeling like people are engaging with them. They like feeling like they're putting on this facade of, you know, a perfect life, beautiful, you know, houses bling, like whatever it is, you know, that people post. But the people who are actually able to be successful, really successful as influencers, you know, on LinkedIn or Instagram, um, they're successful because they're thoughtful about thinking how this engagement and activity can then translate into something that I can monetize, right? So, you know, you might grow your presence on LinkedIn and your objective might be to get a job. Well, great. Then you should be asking yourself, are my efforts of growing and scaling a network on LinkedIn contributing to me actually getting an offer letter? And if your objective for being on LinkedIn and posting is to get a job, which means someone is sending you an offer letter that you can, then if you keep remembering that, then it starts influencing how you choose to spend your time on LinkedIn, right? Um, I have a great example of, like, I've actually seen a lot of people who try to be like LinkedIn influencers on LinkedIn, and a lot of them come from course careers backgrounds. And I feel bad for them because in a lot of ways, like, they're you can see that they're posting and they're posting a lot of similar content that sales influencers post, but you feel bad because you notice after 6 months, like, they're still open to work, they're still looking for a job. And I'm like, hey, maybe if you spend a little bit less time posting this stuff and thinking a little bit like, hey, if my objective on LinkedIn is to get a job, maybe I need to, like, instead of like posting publicly on LinkedIn, I just need to be DMing SDR managers so that I can get jobs, and spending less time focusing on the vanity metrics and the public stuff and focusing on, like, having really deep sort of, you know, conversations and chats with SDR managers who are hiring, right? Um, so I guess all this is to say is, now, if you're like, hey, I actually, instead of getting a full-time job as an SDR at a company, I want to build like a community and monetize that community and build like courses and like things like that and pay it forward to my community, then like your LinkedIn posting and content strategy might be slightly different than someone who's using LinkedIn posts and content to get a job. Does that kind of make sense? Like there's a subtle difference, right? But like
Yeah,
if you're trying to get a
100%.
job and all you're doing is posting like the same regurgitated like SDR outreach type stuff, no one's gonna give a crap. But if your like objective is like, hey, I want to build like a community and like help other people, and I eventually want to create my own courses, then your objective might actually be like, hey, you want to make as many like public posts as possible. But so many times I see people who post on LinkedIn who aren't really thoughtful about like their business objectives or their personal objectives or goals, and you end up with a lot of people who are basically just copying what all the other LinkedIn influencers are doing without actually having a purpose in terms of how it personally benefits them. So what I would say is be thoughtful about always being conscious about like, what is the goal of this post? Is it so that I can get noticed by SDR managers, or is the goal of this post so that I can, get noticed by people who would pay for my courses or content? Is the goal of this post, you know, and maybe as you go through that exercise, you're realizing, hey, why am I posting on LinkedIn no if it's not leading? If my goal is to get a full-time SDR job, and for 3 months you've been posting on LinkedIn and it hasn't like resulted in any conversions, a lot of people fall into that pitfall of being like, oh, this is what everyone's telling me to do, so I got to keep doing that. But it's like, no, you should think about it from a first principles basis and be like, hey, like, is this actually helping me get a job? And suddenly you might be like, oh, well, instead of just posting public stuff, maybe I should spend all my time on LinkedIn just like DMing, um, sliding into SDR managers DMs instead of just like publicly posting, because that's going to be this thing that helps me like networking get a job. So kind of being a little bit thoughtful about like why you're posting and what your business metrics are as you're posting it. You don't have to do it all the time, but kind of having that framework in mind can be very helpful in making sure you're not just posting for the sake of posting.
I like that a lot. And I like how you talked about kind of ineffective, like approaching it and kind of not being as effective. So one thing, I got a top sales voice badge on LinkedIn, and I got that from making the collaborative article post. And I had made a post one time and it got like 10 likes, which is a bunch on one of those. And that's when I actually got my badge. So when I lost my top sales voice or top sales development voice, I got my top sales voice like 2 days later with like 2 to 3 posts because a lot of people resonated with it. And what I said was, you got to approach it with grace and humility. You got to be experimental. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's working, stick to it. So that's kind of like what you just talked about. Like, okay, if you've been doing something for 3 to 9 months straight and it is not working, you obviously need to change something. So you gotta try different things, see what works, and if it's working, stick to it. So that way you don't have open to work 9 months later and you're kind of working in backwards. And that goes back to the ignorance that I talked to of I was a valet manager and I had an IT degree, wanted to get into tech sales, didn't know the steps to take to get into tech sales. Took me 2 years to finally like, okay, let me really like tighten up, focus on what I'm doing, lock in, and really see what path I need and the things I need to do to get here. Find out about course careers, this and that. Them 2 years that I paid, I could have been an AE, I could have been a head of sales by now. If them 2 years I didn't have to pay that ignorance step. So it's a lot of knowledge that people are gonna get from this video. Glencoco, they educated on it now. So you guys don't have to pay that ignorance step and you can take action now. So I want y'all to take action. Ask about when you reached out to me on LinkedIn, what made you reach out and what advice would you have to people like because people feel like when you're talking to people on LinkedIn, I've had people say like, "Oh, you just tell them what you want." I've had people that say like, "You want to make sure you got a lot of pleasantries," but then just like cold calling, some people want you to be straight to the point. Some people want you to do a lot of small talking. So, what made you reach out first of all, and then what advice would you have to people that are like, "Look, I don't really know what to say to these people on LinkedIn. I don't know how to reach out to people."
Well, someone who says I don't know what to say on LinkedIn or how to reach out to people, I would just say like, look, the internet is your friend. YouTube is your friend. Like if you Google like how to reach out to, to people on LinkedIn effectively, just YouTube it, like you're gonna get tons and tons of resources on how to go about doing it. So basically, I would say like the point is that like this is something that I think a lot of like sales reps, a lot of people I talk to who are interested in sales don't like really understand is like the internet is a very, very powerful tool. You can basically search anything you want. You can even use ChatGPT nowadays. Like, how do I write a good sort of like LinkedIn opening message? Um, so anyone who's like, I don't know how to do something needs to very, very quickly understand that the internet is their friend and they can kind of search things and self-teach themselves a lot of things. In terms of like why I reached out to you, obviously we're scaling our kind of marketplace, and so I'm obviously looking to reach out and connect with anyone who's in the SDR space and business development space.
Okay, perfect. So, last advice for the people. A lot of people say do the job to get the job. Now, people give a lot of general advice. That's the reason I ask you what you would say to reach out to people on LinkedIn, because people are going to say, oh, just make the calls. They don't teach you exactly what to say for cold calls. Now, some people don't need that high level breakdown. They can literally, I can say, go make the cold calls, and they'll say the right things, reach out to people, say the right things. So, last piece of advice is do the job to get the job. And when I say that, the job of SDR, you're gonna set up a sales cadence, meaning okay, call on this day, email, call, email. It might be something on LinkedIn. So that's the sales cadence. So you can set that up for hiring managers or the prospect. Okay, day one, cold call. Day two, voice note on LinkedIn. Day two, connect on LinkedIn. Day three, cold email. Day four, cold call. Now, this is all random, but my point is literally do the job to get the job to a T. You're going to get a sales intelligence platform. You're going to get people's contact information. You're going to call them. You're going to email them, put them into a sales cadence. Then, once you get to the interview, you're going to build a relationship with the person. Be very humanizing and personable. Sell yourself, make them like you. That's one of the biggest part that people don't think about is make them like you. This is a real person. Yes, answer their questions, but make them like you and perform. You're going to be able to wow the interviewer and get the job and offer it. So, is there any last pieces of advice that you might have had for people at any point in their journey right now?
Do your homework, I would say, is the most important thing. My grandma always used to tell me measure twice, cut once, which isn't something that my grandma came up with, but it's a pretty famous kind of saying, which is always like, before you cut a piece of cloth, always measure it twice and then cut once. And I think that's a very important sort of like concept where if you're going to be if you're doing an SDR's job, like take 3 minutes out of before you reach out to do the homework, like learn about the person, learn about the company that that they're working at. If you're trying to get a job, show that you've done a little bit of homework. You know, if if there's a job opening, then like do a little research, see if you can get a mutual connection to make you an introduction, see if you can reach out directly to the person or text them or give them a call. Like you'd be surprised how few people go out of their way to do a little extra homework and put in the effort. It's a little bit like dating, right? Like I think getting jobs, I think sales, there's a lot of parallels between networking, getting jobs, getting hired, sales, and dating. So when you're dating, like if you just show up like, you haven't bothered to kind of like do a little preparation, um, put in the effort, then it's going to show. And similarly, if the other person hasn't put in the effort, like it's going to show as well. But you lead to better sort of like connections and outcomes the more sort of like homework and preparation you're able to do. So the internet is your friend, and just kind of like get into the habit of like Googling and looking things up on ChatGPT and asking sort of like questions and preparing for things beforehand. And you'll be better off than like 99% of people out in the market.
Perfect. And I love that you said sales is like dating. So I'm going to expound and reiterate on that because that's something that motivated me personally. One time I was on the phone struggling to make the call when I had first started, and one of my teammates, SDRs, he was like, "Man, sales is like dating," and he kind of explained to me what he meant by that. But what I kind of got from it is kind of it's all about your mindset and how you position yourself. So you wouldn't walk up to a woman and be like, "Oh, I don't really talk to women, but I wanted to give it looked really good, so I wanted to give it a chance, and I was just hoping I could please like finally talk to a woman." That's the same thing as being like, "Oh, I don't, I was doing engineering and I seen tech sales and it looked good, and I was just hoping I could break into tech." So it's all about your mindset. Be positive, be optimistic, and have that dog in you. Do the job to get the job. If you need help, reach out to me for any help within any step of the process, and I will personally mentor you. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode of Tech Sales Heroes, and we'll catch y'all in the next
All right. Thanks very much.
one. Perfect. And scene.